City University of Hong Kong. She uses a wide range of media to create her art. She has collaborated with neuroscientists, stem cell researchers and mathematicians to challenge the boundary between science and art and to develop the relationship between nature and human beings. Let's welcome Professor Jim Profit. Hello.
So this morning I'm going to talk about the work that's up in the gallery. It was made for this show, so it's the first time that I've exhibited it. And there are a couple of important reference points for this work. One of them is a woman called Emma Hauck. She lived from 1878 to 1920. And when she was 30, she was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And she was incarcerated in an asylum. She came out of the asylum briefly and was then diagnosed as terminally psychotic and reincarcerated, and she actually died very young at the age of 41 in the asylum after 11 years. During that time, she wrote many letters to her husband, and you can see an image of one of them on the right-hand side here. She writes the same phrases over and over again in these letters. Until the letters are more like kind of field paintings, if you like, than legible texts. And writing around the same time, we've got psychologists who make the connection between hypergraphia, the compulsion to write repeatedly, and different psychotic states. You might also be familiar with the idea of automatic writing, the notion that we can tap into our unconscious or our subconscious by writing sort of off the top of our head and also almost entering a trance state. So the second and the most central strand of the work upstairs is my experience of receiving hundreds of letters over the course of 25 years that were ranged in length from a couple of words to many hundreds of bound typed pages. And I received these letters from a delusional stalker who was also diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. So he had the same kind of diagnosis that Emma Hauck had had. So this was the source experience, if you like, for the show, and I'm now going to talk a little bit about the works and how they were generated. So here's a scan of one of the many hundreds of envelopes that I'd receive in the mail, and there was a very close connection between my artwork and the letters that I received. So I was 18 when I first started receiving the letters, and they would then usually arrive on fairly plain paper. But once I started having exhibitions, I'd start to receive letters that would include my own work. So this is a letter where the images across the top are from work I made in the early 1990s, and that was sort of used as paper, and then the letters were written over the top of that. I also received not only letters but drawings, so and sometimes there'd be little kind of diagrams. So this is evidently a diagram of an orgasm that's enclosed in the letter. And then there'd be drawings of buildings and places, maps, and also photographs. And you'll see references to these in the show upstairs. So I started to think about some of the more kind of theoretical underpinnings of this kind of compulsion to write, and also what my relationship with this man was, because controversially many forensic psychologists say that the relationship between a stalker and their victim is the most intimate relationship that the victim will have. So rather than trying to hold the stalker at a distance from me, I decided to try and collapse the difference between us. And I think that's where the work fits in to the post-humanism show, where you see many pieces that are about collapsing the difference between the human and the animal, between nature and artifice, between the man and woman. So I'm doing the same thing. I'm kind of collapsing the distance between the sane and the insane. And I've done that in two different ways. One of them is what I'm calling isomorphism. So this is a word from the Greek word meaning iso, equal, and morph, meaning shape. What happens if I take the shape of the stalker? What if I, instead of trying to say this person's so different from me, what if I say, how can I be like them? So I'm trying to experience the similarity of structural form. I'm trying to understand what obsession is, what it feels like to be obsessed. The other side of this is to think about codependency and to think about some of the ideas that Carl Knappert has talked about. To think about the nature of connections between the mind and the object. You know, the pen and the paper, these are objects that this man uses repeatedly over and over again to write. And so if our understanding of material culture is very much about this codependency between the mind, the object, and our behaviour, then I have to assume that my perception of the world is equally codependent and relational. So I'm going to talk now about the actual pieces themselves. There are a series of photographic works called Manifestation, and in a way the production of the works was rather like a performance. So in each case I took a section of text from one of the letters, and you see that in gold etched leaf on the actual glazing of the print. So in this case it's, I've been here specifically to find a Cindy type doll, and Cindy is the UK version of the Barbie doll. So I put that phrase into Google and I just searched for images, and I then looked at the results and I went online and I bought the smallest object I could find from the first couple of pages of the Google search. And I then had that object in the studio and I did a very straightforward, what we call a pack shot, where you take a very cool, detached look at the object and you shoot it as if it's packaging, like your breakfast cereal or your pot noodles. And in each case I chose phrases from the letters that weren't highly charged. I deliberately did not choose the sexually violent expressions in the letters. Instead I looked at repeated phrases and characters that seem to appear in the text. And so you'll see these as you go around the gallery. So here's some of the online shopping images, and then the final pack shot. And in some of the images, because I present them in pairs, so they're kind of a twin, the very cool pack shot on the left, and then an image that sort of describes the process of making. And you can see in this one we've got an overlay onto one of the photocopies of the photographs. I don't have the photographs because they were kept as evidence during a court case, so I was given photocopies and I decided just to work with those. The only actual handwriting you see in this piece is mine, and that's some text that I write about the experience of making the work and receiving the letters. The second two objects in the gallery that I'm going to talk about are called Second Skin, and they're two garments, and they're based on, again, a body experience, if you like, this connection between I referred to earlier about our perception of the world and how the way we think and feel can relate to objects and experiences. So after about 6 years of being stalked, I was in my mid-20s, and I went for a 48-hour trip to a city 200 miles away from where I lived. And I was leaving a nightclub with some friends. We were walking single file, and suddenly a man stepped forward, and he was wearing a parka, one of these coats with a fur trim, and he grabbed hold of me, pulled me to his chest. I couldn't see his face, and he started to drag me down the street. And my friends fought him off. And at that point I realized that it was the man that was stalking me. When I was very surprised, you know, I was 200 miles away, I was very relaxed. So this piece is like the long-armed kind of, almost like your worst nightmare. But on the other hand, I was thinking about what's it like to be that person? What's it like? What's the other side? The non-aggressive, the victim, if you like, in him. And the victim in him is the man that is also forcibly, like Emma Hauck, that the character, the woman I spoke to you about at the beginning, that's forcibly incarcerated. And so the second parka upstairs is also a second skin, and it's the parka that has been customized and made into a straitjacket. So many of the other works that I've made are simulations. They are looking at the rules of behavior of different animals or life forms or cells, and making complex adaptive systems, agent-based systems, where you write mathematical rules, and those rules describe the behavior, for example, of a stem cell, and you then watch the simulation of that complex cellular organism. And so, of course, I can't divorce this piece of work from my other pieces of work. So I thought, what are the rules then that would define the behavior of somebody that's psychotic? And with Emma Hauck, those letters have been presented not only as an expression of her schizophrenia, but they've also been presented as a symptom, if you like, of her schizophrenia. So I thought, if I'm trying to collapse that difference between myself and the other, then the best way of doing that would be for me to try and experience a psychotic episode. And maybe I could take the writing as an example, and I could look at Emma Hauck's writing. So I went into a dark room, and I set myself the project of writing, and this led to the other piece that's up in the gallery called Bad Hand. And in Bad Hand, I go into the dark room and I write until my hand is so cramped that I can't write anymore. And I write on the same page over and over again the first thing that came to mind, which was, leave me alone. So Emma Hauck wrote, sweetheart, please come, to her husband, and I, quite not surprisingly, I write, leave me alone. And there were times when I was writing it that I felt self-conscious, but it was surprising to me how, in fact, I went through a whole range of emotions in the 2 hours that I sat in the room writing. So up in the gallery, you see the projection of this writing, real time, projected from a small lamp. And then the final piece that I'm going to talk about is again based on looking at the experience, or considering the experience of receiving all these letters and thinking about inscription, thinking about writing by hand and handwriting. So I set myself the project of creating a font that was made from the handwriting of the stalker. And I set myself a restriction. I was only allowed to use that font to write about what was happening as I typed. So it was a bit of a performance again. Now, I'd never made a font before, and it's quite a difficult thing to do. And one of the things that's very difficult is to get the spacing between letters so they look good, it looks good. And it's very difficult to get scale right. So this, if you look at this very first page on the left-hand side, it says, I made this first version of the stalker font. And then I write a phrase in English that gives me every letter of the alphabet, which is, the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog. And when I hit the full stop, I got this big black blob because the scale was completely wrong. So then I go back to the font technology software, and I start to edit my font, and the next page looks a bit more easy to read. But I'm only writing about the experience of writing with my hands, and in a way I'm taking his hand. I write my words, but I see his letters in front of me. So it's a complex psychological journey that's going on there as a performance. And what happens is, whenever I type a letter on the keyboard that I haven't yet created in the font, it drops out of the stalker font into Times New Roman, a very standard font. And that's really weird. Like, I'm typing on the screen and suddenly I'm back into kind of this very ordinary business-like font. And I realise in the end that it's all the punctuation that I don't have. And I realise a lot of things. I realise that he doesn't use punctuation very much. And I realise that it's this back and forth psychological state. So in the last couple of minutes, just before I move on to my final slide, I'm just going to remind us then a little bit about some of the underlying theories that I'm thinking about. In agent-based technology, in those simulations that I make of stem cells, I work with mathematicians, and we talk about the way that the organism might perceive the world, perceive its environment. And we use a theory by a psychologist called James Gibson, who takes a relational approach to perception. And he proposes that there's direct perception, that objects, and in this case I'm talking about letters, and he's talking about all sorts of things in the environment, for example, of a cell. Objects have a set of potentialities, something they can offer the organism, and that those are linked to a set of potential actions, and he calls those affordances. And these affordances are not always only embedded in an object, but they can come out of our mutual relationship with the object, between the object and the agent, so between the letter and me, between the letter and him. And when I saw Emma Houck's letters, I was very disturbed, because I was thinking, when she wrote those letters, I'm assuming she wanted them to be sent. And if they were still in the collection of the asylum, they were never sent. And they were then repackaged 100 years later as artworks. And I'm not sure she ever made those works as art. We will never know. And it caused me, I thought about this a lot. But if I think of Emma Houck's letters in terms of Gibsonian affordances, then I think that the letter has two other possibilities. It's not only an object through which we communicate. It's not only an object through which Emma reached out to her husband, Mark. Instead, it might be an act of writing that affords relief, that or in the case possibly of the stalker writing to me, that affords excitement. So we use this word catharsis a lot in the kinds of work that I'm talking about, but I'm thinking about it slightly differently. I'm thinking about letter writing as affording different sort of psychological states. So the letters are quite difficult to read in the font, so I'm just going to read one of the final ones that I wrote with the font. But before I edit the letter O, and add an apostrophe to stop Times New Romans, regular and rude interruptions, I'll have to search your letters for a full stop. The first full stop was too big, but now it's too small. It's barely there. I want a full stop, a proper one, with presence. I've wanted a full stop for years and years. This full stop is almost invisible when I type it. It seems barely there. There's no way it can hold back sentences. It cannot resist the pressure of the letters. The letters just keep coming. On and on. On and on. The full stop is as much good as fly shit to stop them. I can block up my letterbox. I can have the mailroom wherever I work, check all incoming post. But the letters, your letters, keep coming. Hand delivered. Walking through CCTV, wearing your grey top hat to hand deliver your letters. There is no barrier to you. You do not recognise full stops. You walk over stops and keep coming. The best thing to do, I have been told, is to use that first full stop, the big one, the one that looks like a bullet hole, the one that looks like a drop of Indian ink, the one that could be a splash of blood. But between fly shit and bullets, there must be some middle way, a stop with presence, a stop without violence amongst this non-stop violation of me. This is me, writing in your hand, grabbing the pen from you, using my keyboard as your biro. And for these brief interludes, I have your voice. I have my fingers around your throat. I control your words. Thank you very much.
And now we would like to move on to Professor Anna Munster and Dr. Michelle Barker. They both are very, very good artists and also leading scholar in the field of post-humanism in this the theoretical concern of the show. Right, both artists currently teach at the University of New South Wales in Australia, and they have been in collaboration since 1995. Their works incorporate research on neuroscientists and explore the relationship between vision and movements in human perception. Their research interest in neuroscientific developments, diagnostic process is visualized in their lens-based work. Now let's welcome Professor Anna Munster and Dr. Michelle Barker.
Testing. Okay. Hi everyone, thank you for coming on a Sunday morning. I'm Michelle, by the way, and this is Anna. We're going to, just to give you a quick sense, we're going to talk about our work. Well, I'm going to talk about our work firstly, and we're going to tie that in with ideas of perception, which actually quite nicely resonate with what Jane was talking about. And then we're going to actually approach the non-human, if you like. So we've sort of divided the talk into two halves. And with the microphone right in my face, I'll start. And hopefully I'll speak very clearly and slowly, and hopefully things won't get too lost in translation. So perception and the non-human. Recently, the posthuman has become joined by a host of others. Non-humans, both organic and inorganic, inhumans, and even the unhuman. This swarm has been beavering away at the major assertions underlying affirmative and critical propositions about the post-human condition put forward since the end of the 1980s. That is, that the human must or will be overcome. The entry, in particular, of the non-human into these debates lately suggests that we have never been entirely human after all. Consequently, to suggest that we have moved beyond the human, that the human body is an original prosthesis we learn to manipulate, or that we perceive information to be more fundamental than materiality, is now looking shaky. Our point in this paper, and via our body of work that begins with Struck, which is being exhibited here at MoCA, would be, rather, that the non-human fundamentally inhabits all aspects of the human. Thank you. Furthermore, by looking to a range of debates across science studies and philosophies of embodied mind, we can see that arguments for the importance of human, non-human endosymbiosis, have been around for quite some time. This is not to say that we should now stamp out the ethical and political questions of human cause or responsibility, especially in an era which is regarded rightly as Anthropocene. We cannot now blithely return to the post-human, to some idea of the rights of the human individual. Instead, we want to suggest that it is the relation non-human-human that makes us the sentient beings that we are in the world. Body and technology vie for validation in Struck. The work is a multi-channel video and sound installation that uses moving image drawn from neurological imaging. These images conjoin with subjective reactions to medical diagnosis, raising questions about how we gain understanding of disease. In particular, Struck poses a distinction between the minimal forms of medical data, clinical reports and grayscale images, and the experience of bodily reactions and relations to that information. The installation challenges us to comprehend and assimilate this data. What are the differences between clinical diagnosis and interpretation on the one hand, and experiencing neurological damage in one's body on the other? The work also draws out the discrepancies and failures of clinical forms of communication, which sometimes dwell on the strange details and hence deviate from their stated scientific diagnostic purposes. Struck tries to find the place where different affective states converge with scientific processes of visualizing disease. Yet, rather than being only an emotional response to medical visualization and diagnosis, our intention was to look historically and contextually at neurological diseases and specifically the technologies and imaging processes that have been used to visualize the brain and nerves. We wanted to acknowledge the legacy these contemporary technologies inherit from the late 19th century. Hence, our approach is not so much about futuristic technological bodies, but instead a kind of understanding of media and scientific histories and connections. It was during the late 19th century at the infamous Salpêtrière Hospital in Paris that the founding father of many neurological disorders, including multiple sclerosis, many scars, Jean-Martin Charcot, would make some of his most important and questionable discoveries. His discovery of neurological damage occurred in tandem with the treatment of hysterical patients, who were also held in the same institutions. Often, the bodily gestures and expressions of hysterics and neurologically damaged patients were mistaken for each other. Struck recalls this confusion and asks us to assess whether contemporary imaging and diagnosis is really any more accurate or less confused than it was a century ago. The medical reports that appear in the text in Struck pick up on the strange aspects of the diagnosed patient that seems to have nothing to do with her actual neurological status, for example. We also reuse contemporary medical imaging, particularly magnetic resonance imaging, MRI, in order to reflect upon its current truth status. By combining the look and feel of early scientific photography in the moving image of the limping woman in Struck, together with MRI images, we trace a visual legacy that the contemporary medical image inherits from the 19th century. This legacy is not simply visual, but forms part of the social history of medicine. This reflects the evolving relationship between the origins of neurological disease and the emerging techniques of first photography and later the moving image. The work uses black and white photographic, video and textual images, resulting in a stark monochromatic feel. Drawing upon the sparse qualities of grayscale information, the only visual information available for neurologists and radiographers to interpret an MRI, Struck gives the viewer a stripped-back visual space in which to interpolate their own information and interpretation. The installation's accompanying soundscape acts as a counterpoint to the visuals, using samplings of the 19th century composer Liszt and drawn-out bowing of cellos, pulling the audience into the turbulence and confusion of the affective experience of disease. What emerged in the installation design for Struck was an audiovisual environment that explored how the moving, actively seeing human figure in both the representational screen space and proprioceptive installation space might shift our understanding of how human perception functions. We wanted to move away from old models of perception based on an input-stimulus brain processing model. We were concerned with some of neuroscience's surprisingly disembodied approaches to diseases of the nervous system, and the installation design itself is an attempt to engage audiences in a more enactive way. We began to consider how a 3-channel, U-shaped video projection environment might help us reconsider how visual perception works differently from this old input processing model. The centre screen, where our spotlight of attention falls, let us also exploit our peripheral vision, which in the installation falls in the left and right channels. In vision, our ability to see is reduced in the peripheries to a moving blur until we turn towards the periphery, and it then becomes our new spotlight. The 3 channels of movement in Struck beckon the audience to constantly look around to the sides, thus engaging the eyes in movement around the room from centre to periphery and back. Should a viewer stay only visually centred, then their peripheral vision becomes more distracting, flickering between MRIs, writhing hysterics, and whirling fluids. In other words, we try to use the installation space to encourage a vision that must move in order to perceive. This work began an ongoing questioning of various models of perception. In particular, the paradigms still prevalent from psychology through computer science to some branches of neuroscience, that the senses are processing stations for incoming information. We try to develop instead an understanding of how our computational media environment offers affordances for a different approach to perception. One that can help to generate an understanding of perception as a process actively co-emerging with human embodiment in relation to a non-human milieu. Recently, these concerns have found form in another of our multi-channel works, Hocus Pocus. This work is an interactive magic show of sorts, concerned primarily with close-up or parlour magic, which reached its peak as a style of magic performance during the Victorian era in England and Europe. Our installation resonates with such a style, and its video sequences are divided into 5 categories: cards, cups and balls, coins, thimbles and rings, echoing the tricks of a close-up magic performance. A magician was filmed performing these tricks, but our intention was never to simply document a magic show. Part of what makes magic work is the experience itself. The surprising realisation that the magician produced a coin out of nowhere, as you seemingly watch his every move. The tricks in Hocus Pocus have not been digitally manipulated by using computer graphics. Their multi-channel display does not reveal how the trick has been done. Rather, it unfolds then temporally and spatially, amplifying and intensifying aspects of close-up magic, such as the flourish and sleight of hand. Thank you. I'm just going to show you one little bit of that, I think. Oh. I've just lost our slide, but we'll get back there. Okay, so this work is not an attempt to directly apply or prove these ideas of an active perception. Rather, the aim is to develop and enact resonances. The installation consists of 3 channels of high-definition video arranged in a U-shape and 4 channels of audio set into each corner of the space. A magician's top hat is sensor-enabled and sits on a plinth in the middle of the space. In the interaction design, we wanted to use gesture to call up clips and sequences of videos and sound, and therefore suggest that perception always relies upon active, cross-modal relations between the senses. As you wave your hand across the top hat, new images load, often on the side screens, and sound transits across the room, shifting your attention as you actively perceive the media shifting around the space. The participant and the media co-constitute the illusionary environment.
Okay, my turn. So now we want to try to relate this kind of way of designing installation and media environments to the idea of the non-human. So before we actually arrive at that relationship, the human-non-human, we need to understand a little bit what is at stake in rethinking perception. So we refer a little bit to the ideas of Alva Noé, who's a philosopher of mind, who claims, much like Gibson, who James referred to, that perception is an activity, and that consequently isolated sensory systems such as vision on its own are not appropriate models, since seeing itself takes place via acquired sensory motor knowledge. If, as Noé suggests, we consider sensory perception on a predominantly visual brain model, that is, an older model, with the eye compared to a camera and the brain a processor, what you end up with is the world seen in a kind of high-definition, sharp focus from the centre to the periphery. And this is the model suggested by the very famous Ernest Mach image from the 19th century, where he attempted to draw his own visual field, rendering depth of field infinitely and perfectly in focus, and that's the line drawing that you see in the slide. But that is not what happens when we're actually in the activity of seeing or looking at an object. Instead, what happens is that our peripheral vision is always blurred. And it's these blurred areas that become the region that the eye actively seeks out and scans in order to continuously bring the world into focus. Visual perception is therefore accompanied by activities of the sensory motor apparatus, moving our eyes around so that we bring the world into vision. So vision and the apparatus is constantly changing in connection with its surroundings, with its environment. And in this way, the human perceptual apparatus actively produces a looked-at world. This is a way of thinking through perception that identifies a world brought forth or enacted by the embodied relations sustained between an organism and its environment. A major shift in the understanding of perception as an apparatus occurred with the 1959 publication, which has a great title. It's called "What the Frog's Eye Tells the Frog's Brain." And this was a paper that was written by a group of interdisciplinary scientists led by Umberto Maturana, a biologist. And this detailed study of how a frog's visual system sees only what is moving in its environment and how such perception is fundamental to the frog's existence as living organism challenged an entire scientific and philosophical paradigm about the structure and relations between sensation, perception and the world. In living organisms with a visual system, eyes had previously been thought to be sensory organs receiving light and then transmitting this information to the organising brain. The brain, therefore, told the eye what it was seeing. But what Maturana and the group of scientists who wrote this paper called "What the Frog's Eye Tells the Frog's Brain" proposed was to study a frog's eyes as part of a system that worked to actively organise vision. The eyes of the frog are unlike human eyes. They anatomically constitute a single visual system which reaches from the retina back to the superficial layers of the brainstem. The human visual system is different. It's a double system which allows the eyes themselves to move in relation to the sensory world. So humans' eyes follow the movement of the other moving things in their environment, whereas the frog's eyes remain stable. The frog's singular visual system involves a coupling of the frog with its environment, resulting in it only perceiving food if its prey is moving. The eye-environment coupling tells the frog's brain what the frog needs to perceive, in the sense that it provides an already systematically and actively organised frog visual perception system for its brain. Let's just have a quick look at this video because it illustrates it very well.
A vertical stripe is ignored.
Yep.
To analyse when the toad comes to the decision prey or non-prey, the animal is placed inside a glass vessel so that it cannot approach the object. Obviously, the toad comes to this decision before it turns. Vertical stripe in the lateral visual field, no response. Horizontal stripe, immediate response.
So you can see how coupled its vision is with what's going on in the environment. It's a fantastic little clip, that one. So you're seeing a vision system in action here. The image of prey is not in the toad's mind, but rather is generated between and across the differences of toad and prey as environment, as these differences continuously generate perceptual information. So it's not, this argument is often misinterpreted. And what's not being said is that the frog simply constructs its perceptions. What is being said is that perception, such as a vision system, is active, and that this system involves relations of coupling between an organism and its environment. This coupling, or co-determination, actively generates perception by calling upon the pattern of relays that develop between sensory motor experience and the neural system of the animal. So it's this approach that we draw on and which Noe talks about when he talks about inactive perception. Inactive perception is something that living organisms do rather than have. So what's being challenged is the idea that perception is a genetically or hardwired fixed property or thing that we have, where we have a set of internal representations that somehow match real objects out there in the world. So what's relevant in this context of rethinking our desire for post-humanism, a desire for life beyond the human, is that the inactive approach to perception rests on the fundamental importance of relations to the non-human. It first does this via its study of the frog, through which Maturana and the other scientists came to rethink perception as no longer a property of mind, but as a system that arises through interaction. And this, of course, points to the importance of other animals' behaviour as a source of difference and comparison for any ethology. Ethology being the study of living organisms' behaviour. So we cannot understand human perception unless we understand it differentially amongst a spectrum of all living organisms with nervous systems, and potentially ones without as well, which is a really interesting area, but I'm not going to go into that. An inactive approach cements the relation to the non-human in studying animal perceptual systems as models for bio-environmental coupling. That is to say, the frog study demonstrates that perception is not a property any living organism essentially has. Instead, it's a process generated by living as a biologically differentiated organism in relation to a specific milieu. The perceptual system of the human, then, is only one differentiation in the continuum of all non-human bioenvironmental perception, understood as inactive process. I think there are a lot of, I'm just going to, skip now because we're running out of time. I think there are a lot of implications for how we might use this idea of perception for actually also rethinking the kind of dominance that the idea of intelligence has come to occupy in thinking, for example, about, you know, how humans possess a superior intelligence, or even how humans' intelligence might be overcome by a more superior machine intelligence in the future. If we actually took perception as the kind of ground for thinking how behaviour emerges in the world, we might come at some very different ideas about you know, where the human is and where the machine is and where other animals are. So what are the consequences of placing non-humans as fundamental to an understanding of perception for humans in an age of computational machines, media assemblages and digital environments such as the ones we see in the shows upstairs? What we want to suggest is that a kind of inactive approach provides us with a way of positioning humans coupled with their contemporary information-saturated environments as a new differentiation in the non-human continuum. It's not then that digital technologies or media environments should be seen as additions or replacements, proof of an evolutionary surpassing of the human. Rather, it's that our human sensory motor system, providing the biological parameters, is now in an ongoing process of coupling and decoupling with media information machines and environments. As information becomes our milieu, so too will new modes of enacting perception arise out of our human-machine couplings. And it's this sometimes disjunctive, sometimes co-adaptive coupling that will provide the conditions for the process that is ongoing enactment of perception. As such, perception will always turn out to have been before and after the human, in primary relation to the non-human. Now I'll give those poor translators a break.
I'm really interested in creative and critical thinking, and I've been sort of whirring around ideas about those as you've been speaking. And I think that creative and critical thinking are about being able to bring to mind past experiences as well as future possibilities. And I wonder whether you've thought about kind of models of thinking models in relation to that frog research and ideas of perception. Because it's
in terms of the frog's past perceptions, or
what I'm thinking of is that when you're talking about perception, you're bringing in peripheral vision.
Yep.
And I think what happens when you're doing creative or critical thought is that you bring in peripheral vision, but kind of from memory, from the things you've experienced in the past, and you use those as tools to unlock an understanding or meaning about the thing that you're doing at that time or something you might do in the future. It seems less biological but quite closely related.
Do you want to talk about memory at all?
Look, I think what you're suggesting would open up. It's a discussion I'd love to have, but really conscious of time. I don't even know if there's a 30-second way to talk about this, other than to say that in terms of the work that Anna and I are doing, the relationship between a lived experience and perception, is absolutely, you can't separate the two things. And that very much goes back to the stuff that Varela and Noe are saying, that it's our complete past, present and future that give us every moment that we have. So you can't experience those things in isolation. But of course, the frog has this also. and so we're not being speciesism here at all. Like it's every kind of organism has relations and has neurological systems and nervous systems that they draw upon, which is based on past experiences, and in those moments there's a whole lot of stuff that Varela talks about, and some not very nice tests that use cats, but it's okay that they survive it, but it's just not very nice. But yeah, so it's a very sort of complex kind of intermingling of experience and memory and in the moment. But yeah, I think just conscious of time, I'd probably have to leave it there.
I actually wanted to ask Jane a question. Wow. So first of all, I have to say what an incredibly brave project to take on. The question I want to ask was about the difference or similarity between willing something and desiring something, and if you think there's a difference, because in a lot of kind of psychological models, I'm thinking not neuropsychological, I'm thinking more psychoanalytical here, the difference that kind of rests between psychosis and non-psychosis is the difference between desire and kind of the will, I suppose. Desire being a situation where you can't actually you can't stop the shutdown, you can't stop the kind of dissociation, can't stop dissociation. Versus being able to actually will that stop. So I'm just interested in the process that you undertook of willing yourself to do something, and how, I don't know, it's a very, yeah.
I think that's a really interesting question, because I think it's also possibly that this difference between desire and will is a continuum, and you get slippage. So, of course, when I rehearsed my talk, I was very professorial, and I didn't find it emotionally affecting. I was completely in control. And then when I get here, I exhibit that which I talk to you about, which is this connection between the object and its affect. So I start reading what I've read a million times, and I'm affected by it. And I think, so in that situation, you have a great example, I think, of how, what we feel and what we think and how we perceive the world is constantly in shift. So in the context of my hotel room, where I'm the only person there, I can will myself to be, in control. And then I get here and it's sort of emotionally charged. It's the first time I've ever spoken about it publicly, and I get into that, a different state on that spectrum. And I suspect that this is really, if you like, it's the whole story. It's maybe the only story from, if I try to put myself in the place of the other, of the stalker, that sometimes he can not enact his desire and he can impose his will on his own behaviour, and at other times that doesn't work. So I mean, I haven't ever thought about it actually in terms of will and desire, but it's, I can see where you're coming from with that.
No,
I don't know if I've really answered your question, because I haven't thought about it deeply before in those terms.
Yeah, because I was just thinking, I mean, it is a really slippery thing once you start thinking about affordance, because you're thinking about the way in which affect is not, or even thought isn't in the possession of a subject or an object, but constantly being negotiated between. So, yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think that looking at the pieces that you've shown as well, you have this the embodiment and the situatedness is very, very important, and obviously that's constantly shifting. And you imply that and enact it with the 3 screens and our perception, and then remind us with you in your talk that the frog's perception is very different. And I'm aware that I can have fantasies of what Emma Hauck's perception of her world was when she was writing, and I can have fantasies about what the stalker's perception is, but I cannot ever possibly know. We're separated in time and space.
Right. I'm sure that some of you still have some questions, and I'm sure that probably you would like to talk more about your works yourselves. Right. I think because of the time limit, we have to stop this panel now. Let's have 10 minutes break. So shall we all come back? It should be actually 11:40, but we are running 5 minutes late. Should we still come back 11:45, 11:45? Yeah. Thank you very much.